Welcome to Seaside Quilting Tutorials. My name is Terry, and today we're going to talk about the matching table runner to go with the Star Heart pillow covers that we made earlier. This is kind of a continuation from that series. This will be the last part of it, although you could take this and you could turn it into a really nice quilt. If you were to times this by 4 or even 5 rows, you'd end up with a really nice quilt. So what we did was we took our block from the Star Heart pillow cover and we made 3 blocks. And I'm not going to show you how to make them today because I've already gone over all of that in the pillow cover, so I'm going to be referring you back to that tutorial to make each of your blocks, and also to refer you back to how to do your stitch in the ditch to quilt this and finish it off. All of that's in that tutorial, so I'll be directing you back to that. So what we did is we took 3 of the blocks and we put them together. Now you could variate this if you wanted to put a sashing in here, maybe a 1-inch sashing or a 2-inch sashing between each block. But what I really liked about it was when you put the blocks together, you end up with this nice diamond shape in between them, which I just think looks kind of nice. So I put them together this way, but you sure can change it up if you would like to. It will change your dimensions as far as length, unless you decided to do a complete border around as well, which you could do if you would like it to be a little bigger of a table runner. This one itself ended up being 18 inches by 54 inches long, so it's already a pretty good size table runner. And then I have my backing in there and my batting on the back to do my my backing fabric rather. So when I did my backing, of course, fabric is typically 42 inches to 44 inches in width. So what I did was I cut 18 inches by the width of the fabric, and then I had to cut another piece 18 inches by what I needed more and sewed it on so I could get the length that I needed. Now for your backing and your batting, as I mentioned in the pillow cover tutorial, I always have some extra. Now for the pillow, I only did about 1 inch, 1.5 inches extra on each side of the fabric in the batting. And that worked fine for something that's small, 18 by 18 inches. But now we're working with something that's longer. It's the same width, but it's longer. So I felt a little more comfortable with going with 3 inches extra. You probably could have gone with 2, but I always feel comfortable having a little bit more than ending up with less. And the reason why we do that is because as you quilt this, the more this isn't heavily quilted because we did stitch in the ditch, but if I was to put this under my long arm and say do some ruler work in each one of the sections, then it would pull more and more in. And so you need that extra on the side, so as your batting and your backing pull in, you don't run out and end up with it too short. And I've had that happen. I had a customer one time, or a couple times actually, send me only enough backing to barely cover the back. It was maybe about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch wider than the length and the width. And I was really skeptical about it, but they were said, oh, I really love this fabric, I really want this on the back. And I ended up a little tiny bit short. So the batting was fine because I cut that wide enough, but when I got to the edges, the backing ended up in a little bit too short, about 1/4 of an inch. So what we ended up doing with that was we ended up trimming the quilt down to the size of the backing. So it took some from the top. And I don't really like to end up doing that, because after somebody's done a lot of work on their top, you hate to lose any of it. So now that you have your 3 blocks put together, and you know, surely if you want this longer, say you have a really long table, you could add another block to it. It's all in what you want to do. If you want it shorter, you could put just 2 blocks together, and that would be perfectly fine as well. It's all what you decide that you would like to do. And you'll have your measurements for how much fabric you would need for 1 block on the pillow cover PDF. So if you decided you only wanted to do 2 blocks for a table runner, say you have a smaller table that you want to put it on, you just times everything by 2. So you would need 2 times the fabric, 2 times the cutting pieces. I'm going to do 3 for you on the PDF for the table runner, so that you'll have enough to do it the way that I've done it. But you can surely change that up if you would like to change it up. Today is going to be more about binding, because that's the one thing that I find people have problems with, and often keep them from doing a project like this, because they're like, okay, well, you know, if I make the table runner, then I need to do a binding. What do I do about that? I don't know how to do binding. So that's what we're going to concentrate on today for this tutorial, is binding it. Now there's kind of there's multiple ways to do binding. Some people will cut their backing a little extra wide, and then they'll cut their, which we do anyways for a project this size, and then they'll cut their backing down so that it's I'd have to look up the measurements for sure, but I think it's around 1/2 an inch that you would cut it wider than your top, and then you can fold it over 1/4 of an inch and then fold it over to your top, and you can use that. And it's I think that's called self-binding. I'm not going to show that today, but I will show that later on in a future tutorial. The other way that sometimes people like to do it, I'm going to show you this on a scrap, because this isn't actually how I'm going to do mine. But I'll show you on a practice piece that I did a while back. So I'm going to use my 1/4 inch guide foot and put my machine on 1/4 inch. Now, we're going to do this, if we were to do it this way, we would do it on the back of the quilt. So what you would do is you would take your strips, which I'm going to show you how you put your strips together for a quilt, but we're just doing a practice one. But this is 2.5 inches wide. I folded it in half and press. And then I'm going to lay it so that it's right on the edge. And I'm going to adjust my camera after for when I'm doing the binding to get you closer to the sewing part so you can see what I'm doing with binding. But for now, I'll just leave it the way that it is. So, like I said, I don't think that got on camera. This is 2.5 inches. I folded it in half and I pressed it. And then you're going to line it up. And this would be much longer of a binding, but I'm just showing you with a shorter piece how you would do it. So you're going to line that up with the edge of your quilt, so edge to edge. You want to get that lined up really well. And then you would sew a 1/4 of an inch seam We're not going to do the corners with this because I'm going to show you corners in a minute with the other one. But I just want to show you a different way that you could do your binding. And some people do it this way. So now you finger press it down and you fold it over to the I totally said that wrong, and I apologize because I'm used to doing it my other way. Okay, so we'll pretend this is the front of the quilt. Let me think about this. Yeah, so this would have been the front of your quilt. We sold it a quarter of an inch. I'm sorry. I'm so used to doing it the other way. I do all my quilts the other way. I tried it this way years ago, and I didn't like stitching in the ditch, so I didn't continue to do it. So then you would fold it so that it goes to the back. And you can either pin it, or you can clip it, whichever works best for you. Now, some people, what they'll do is they'll sew it to the front like that, and they'll fold it over, and they'll hand stitch their binding down because they prefer to have a hand stitched. I used to do that many years ago, but my hands are arthritic, and the more that I do something like that, the more my hands cramp up and get sore, so I don't do that anymore. I do the majority of mine by machine now. So I'm going to adjust my camera just so that you can see a little bit better. Okay, so I'm going to change over to my stitch in the ditch foot. And I'm going to go to a straight stitch because the stitch in the ditch foot has just a single hole in it. And to show you this a little bit closer on camera, your stitch in the ditch foot has just a single hole for the needle to go down, so it has to be in straight stitch. And you have a guide here in the center. Let me see if I can get that in camera better. You have a guide here that's in the center where your needle will be, and you're going to be using that to guide you through sewing. And so now that you have your fabric, we're going to pretend that it's all pinned to the back. I'm just going to lay it down nice and flat. And you're going to want your guide to sit right up against your binding. We don't want to sew onto our binding. We don't want to sew onto our quilt. We want to stay right in that ditch that we've created. And then you're going to sew, and you're just going to do the, I'm going to turn my machine down actually, so I'm sewing a little slower. And you're going to try to stay right in that ditch. Once again, I'm not really well practiced with this, so I ended up a little bit on top of my fabric instead of in the ditch, which actually wouldn't be totally bad if it stayed consistent and straight. And then this is what your back would end up looking like. So you would use the same color as your binding because it's going to sew on top of your binding, and you would have like a little flap in the back. And that's a perfectly acceptable way to do it. It's all a matter of what works for you, what tools you have available to you, what your machine will use. So we're going to go back to my regular foot because I'm going to show you how to put your binding together. Now in the PDF, I will put the formula for figuring out how much binding you would need. So say you decided to only do 2 blocks, I will have a formula at the bottom of the PDF that will show you how to figure out your binding. So basically what you do for that formula is, I know that my piece is measured out to 18 by 54. So you would add your width and your length. Then you would times that total by 2. You would add 10 to that total because you need a little bit of extra when you're combining your sides together, and you'll be seeing that when I get to it. And then you would divide that by 42 or 44 or however long your fabric is that you're going to be cutting. So when we say width of fabric, you have to remember also that you're cutting off a certain amount of your selvage at the end. So just measure your piece, and typically I divide by 42 pretty much all the time. Even if my fabric is supposed to be 44 or 43 inches, I typically divide by 42 unless I know that that fabric is shorter. And that pretty much covers me because we're adding that 10 on at the end. And you'll see a little bit better when we do the formula. And I already put some of this together just because it ends up long as we're going through. I needed 4 pieces for this one after I did my formula. As you put them together, which you'll see, I'm going to show you how we put them together. But as you put them together, the one thing to remember is that your fabric needs to be right side to the right side. And in the beginning, when I started doing binding, sometimes I would end up sewing my next piece to the wrong side, and then when I went to go iron it and whatnot, realized that I'd made a mistake. And that can be frustrating if you've already cut this part off, which I'm going to show you how to cut this part off. We'll get to that. But just as a memory thing, when I go to my next piece, after I've pieced some pieces together, I always check and make sure that this is up, because I know this is going to be my right side because my seam's down on the back side. So I just check that first, and then I move my fabric along until I get to the next end. And then I'm going to take my next piece. These are cut 2.5 inches by the width of the fabric, and I needed 4 of those for this binding. Okay. Now with a solid, I don't have to worry too much, but the outside of your fabric, when it's coming off the bolt, is your right side. So I know that as I unfold this, that my right side was on the outside. Making sure I'm getting this on the camera. So I have my one piece going in this direction. This is the one that I'm attaching to. And I'm going to add my next piece. So I'm kind of crossing them over each other. One's going this direction, one's going straight up and down. And I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to go diagonally from corner to corner. Let me get this up here a little bit better. It's hard sometimes to get things in the camera, and I had ordered a stand for my camera, but it won't lean down enough for it to show what I'm doing on the table. So I've got to return it and see if I can find a better one. Hopefully I'm getting this in here nice enough so that you can see it. So I have my piece going this direction, which is the one that I was already working on. I'm attaching a piece so it's on top, right sides together, and they're crossing each other. And so I'm taking my ruler and I'm going diagonally from corner to corner. And since this is black, I'm using my Bohemian retractable chalk pencil, so I'll be able to see my marking. I use chalk quite often. I have different colors of chalk that I put in my pencils. Okay. Now, if you feel like you're going to lose your alignment, some people worry about that, you could put a pin over to the side over here out of the way. And we're going to be sewing diagonally, following our line. You won't need anything special. You're just going to be following your line with your needle. And you've got a little center red guide in your straight stitch foot to help you with that. And you could use some of the tapes that they have that you can put down on here. It's up to you. I just follow my line. I get my line centered up there. I'm hoping you're being able to see this well enough. So I get my line centered up with my red line there. And I'm going to put my needle down. And I'm going to follow my line as I sew. Okay, and I can take my pin out. I usually guesstimate this because I'm so used to doing it, but for new beginners, I have this 1/4 inch ruler. I know that you can get, probably, I don't know about this exact one. I've had this one for so many years now, I don't even know what company it came from. But you can just place your 1/4 inch ruler, or you can use a regular ruler and just get it to your line of the 1/4 inch. And we're going to draw another 1/4 inch line right next to that line. Like that. Whoops. And then using your scissors, you can use a rotary cutter for sure if you prefer to do it that way, and just get your ruler up, you know, 1/4 inch from your line and cut with your rotary cutter. Usually I'm doing this sitting at my sewing table, so I just use my scissors and I cut across that next line. And then you're going to cut your dog ears off. We don't want those in the way. Oh, there we go. Throw that away. And then when we fold it out, you'll have a connected piece. Now, some people like to iron these, or press these rather, so that they're open. I prefer them. I prefer my seam to go to the side. Some do it open because they don't want as much bulk. I've never found it to be a problem as far as bulk. I like my seams to the side, and the reason being is I find it stronger. It keeps my seams stronger. Your binding on a quilt takes a lot more beating than I think the quilt itself. And quite often on older quilts, very, very old quilts, I'll see more often tattered bindings long before I see a tattered quilt. Or at least that's what I've seen. I don't know about others, but that's been my experience. And I've even had people bring me quilts and say, hey, can you fix the binding on this? And I've taken their old binding off and put a brand new binding on. I'm going to get these other ones trimmed, and then I'll show you the next step. I hope everyone's having a great day. I don't know what your weather is, but it's rainy here, and it's making me feel cold. Okay, so once you get that done, I'm going to be taking this over to my ironing station. Let me see if I can adjust this camera just a little bit more. Trying to make it so that you'll be able to see my sewing after, and I don't forget to move my camera over. So you're going to take this over, you're going to press it, you know, if you want your seams open, press them open. I like them to the side, so I'm going to be pressing them to the side. And then I'm going to take my fabric, making sure that I press the wrong side to the wrong side. I'm going to fold this in half, and I'm going to press. And I'm going to press. And I'm going to keep doing that as I go along until I have the whole amount of the strip folded and pressed. Okay, and we have that pressed. And one of the things that I forgot to mention when I was putting my pieces together, I don't know if it was seeable in the camera or not, but when I cut my strips 2.5 by the width of the fabric, I do not cut my selvage off at that time. When I did my one piece, you know, that was I was working on going this way and my other one going that way, they still had the selvage on them. That selvage ends up getting cut off when I do my 1/4 inch and I'm clipping everything. So you don't even have to worry about cutting your selvage off to put your pieces together. It might actually send off your measurements from your formula that I'm going to be giving you. So don't bother with cutting off your selvages. You always put, and I get so used to doing things myself that are very common to me and forget to explain it. But when I have my piece going this way and my piece going that way, I don't know if you picked it up in camera, but I had each one lined up and set on top of each other. Let me show you with my ends here. So say I was putting these together like I had showed you before. I have my one piece going this direction, my selvage is here. I have my other piece going on the top, and notice that I have them extending past each other. So my selvage is over here and my selvage is up here, and I did my line diagonally. So then when I did another line 1/4 inch over and I do my cut, that selvage comes off. So I don't even have to worry about it until I get to this point, and that will come right off. And then I took it over and I did my folding in half, and now I'm back. And so now I still have my selvage on the end because, like I said, I didn't cut them off. So I just fold my end over a little bit so I can take off that selvage from this end. And I do a little snip and get rid of that selvage piece. Okay. So now let me get this set up because we're going to do our sewing our piece on. And let me see. I'm going to be putting a red thread in my bobbin. I'm really hoping that this is picking up well in my camera so you're not missing what I'm doing. So I'm putting red thread in my bobbin because the back of my table runner is red. And I'm going to be using black. And I use Aurifil. And let me tell you, I never used to know the difference in thread until I actually started doing free motion quilting. And I used to use some horrible thread that I actually bought at box stores like Walmart and etc. etc. I'm not going to point out brands because I don't want to get into, some people like different brands and whatnot. But a friend of mine kept saying, well, you need to try Aurifil, you need to try Aurifil. And the first time that I did free motion quilting on my sewing machine, they said to practice with, on whatever color, use a different color thread so you could see your stitches and so that you could learn from seeing your stitches. I had red thread literally vomiting lint out of the top. I had to have a vacuum next to me to suck the thread up every so often. And you wouldn't believe how much thread was down in my bobbin area, and oh, it was horrifying. It was horrifying. And so I went in and I talked to the woman that I had bought my machine from, and she said, oh my goodness, I've never seen that happen before. And I said, well, what thread are you using? And she said, Aurifil, you ought to try it out. So I went, I went to buy Aurifil, and I saw the price on it compared to what I was paying, because I was paying maybe $1, $2 for thread, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this stuff is so expensive. But I said, well, okay, well, I'm going to try it. But in my brain, I'm thinking, man, I don't know if I want to spend that much on thread. Let me tell you, you want to get a better thread, because the better thread is so much nicer. You don't get as much lint down in your machine. And when you have to take a machine in to get it cleaned or repaired because too much lint down in there, if you're not cleaning your machine out regularly, eventually builds up, and lint builds up heat. Heat deteriorates our needles. It deteriorates the insides of our machines, and if you have to take it in to be cleaned or repaired, just your basic cleaning and whatnot, and doing your timing and all that kind of stuff, last I knew was $169. I'm sure it's gone up since then, because that was a couple of years ago. And then if you need parts or anything, it can go up quite a lot. So caring for your machine is vitally important, and using good thread, using good needles spares you from a lot of problems. If you bust a needle, quite often people will say, well, I use a needle until it breaks. And I used to do that. That's exactly what I used to do. I didn't know that there was a time limit on your needles. But what happens is after you've used a needle past 8-10 hours, depending on the quality of the needle, like titanium, chromium needles last longer. But your regular basic needles, you should change out every 8 hours of use, or every big project. Chuck it. It is cheaper to chuck a needle and change it than it is to repair your machine. Every time you break a needle, depending on how it got broken, say you're sewing on fabric and it busts, usually the end will get stuck in your fabric. But say a piece goes down into your machine. Now it can cause damage down in there, depending on where it ends up, because it's not going to stay in one place as your machine shakes and so forth while you're sewing. Those pieces move around. And depending on where they land, they can cause damage inside your machine. The other thing that happens is every time you break a needle, you can damage your upper part up in here. And I used to know the names for all these pieces, but I'm not good with names of anything. But anyways, you can literally set your tension off by breaking needles. And I had one time where I thought I was in straight stitch, but I had been stitching in 1/4 inch. I put a different foot on. My machine will censor when I put a different plate in, but it won't censor when I put a different foot on quite often. It will tell me what foot I should use, but if I put a different foot in, it doesn't know that. So I had my needle over here for 1/4 inch. I had put in a straight stitch foot, and when it came down, it hit my foot. And it actually took a nick out of the corner of my foot. And it set my tension off, and I had to take my machine in and be retensioned and whatnot. And I had paid for the extra warranty, so it got fixed. Not for free. They say for free because you paid for your thing. But anyways, I paid a good price for my, for my maintenance plan. So anyhow, I was covered, but still, it had set off my tension and it wasn't sewing properly, and so I had to take it in and get it repaired. So really, that's something important to pay attention to. Okay, enough of that. Let's get to business. So the way that I do my binding, I actually learned from watching Missouri Star Quilting. And sometimes when something clicks for us, you can watch it from 5 to 6 different people, and you watch it with the right person and it clicks. I also took a binding class in person, which helped to meld that in because she did it the same method. And so between the class and watching that video, it helped to mesh it in, and now I do binding all the time, so I don't even think about it as much as I used to, but it takes a little practice. One of the ways that I practiced in the beginning was to make, pot holders, or just make up a sandwich and practice on a sandwich. But it's good to practice a little bit ahead of time and get used to the method, feel that you get the method down. And then the more that you do binding, it just becomes secondhand, like doing your ABCs, riding a bike, whatever. And you don't even think about it anymore. So when I start out, I'm going to leave, a tail, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 inches or so longer. And you'll see why when we get to that point. And I'm not going to sew that part. I'm just going to leave it kind of flapping in the wind over here. And I'm going to start sewing. And so typically, I don't start in any particular spot. You can start in the middle, you can start up in here. I just don't start super close to a corner. I like to be a little ways from the corner and sew up to it. And I'm, like I said, or at least I think I did, I'm using my 1/4 inch guide foot. There are magnets that you can put down on your plate so that you can get it up to the 1/4 inch and use that for a guide, and use a straight stitch foot. They have different tapes that you can put down so you can follow your 1/4 inch. Better put this in 1/4 inch. I thought I had this set. Why did I have it in straight stitch? Okay. So, that's the information on that. And I have my binding lined up with the edge of my quilt flush. And this is the top. This is how I do it. Oh, wait a minute. Doing this on film, I have to tell you, really messes with my head. No, I excuse the whole top thing. I am so sorry. Like I said, when I do things, normally I just go do them. I don't even think about it. But when I'm on film, I have to think a little bit more about what I'm doing. and because I was showing you the other way over there. So I leave my flap. I'm going to get this flush with my side, and I'm on the back side of my quilt to sew this down. I really apologize for the mistakes. There's no practicing this ahead of time. The filming part of it and the sewing part I've practiced many times. But when it comes to doing this on film, things get a little miscombobulated in your head. You have to think a little harder. You don't have a person there that you're talking to. So, okay, let's get this sewing. Now I have my machine set so that it's going to stop in needle down position. My foot lifts up for pivoting and whatnot. If you have a machine that doesn't have, and there are some that don't have a needle down so it stays down. When you go to stop, before you move anything, you just want to take your hand wheel and turn your hand wheel toward you until your needle is down before you move your hands away. I usually hold my hand up here. I've got my other hand down here, paying attention to my fabric. I know my hand's going to get in the way as I'm sewing, and it's frustrating trying to be able to show you on camera. And if you have a harder time seeing me doing this, I really apologize. Trying to think how I can get this onto camera for you so that you can see it better. And I'm not sure I have the capability to do that. I'll do the best that I can to show this to you. So I have my hand up in here. Let me readjust my camera. That's what I'm going to do. I'll be right back. Okay, I've readjusted my camera. I hope this is going to help as I'm sewing to be able to see things a little better. So I hold my hand up kind of close to my foot. And I don't overstretch, but I do a little bit, just a small pull, just to keep it straight. You don't want to like really tug on it hard, but just a little bit so that it stands straight and firm on top of your fabric. And I'm going to sew my 1/4 of an inch. So for some that are getting used to doing this, I'm going to take my 1/4 inch ruler. I'm going to place it on the very edge of my fabric down here. And I'm going to do a mark so I know where my 1/4 inch is. And I'm going to stop right where I get to that line. And I'm going to turn my fabric so that the corner is here. I want it to now be going diagonally off of my fabric. So it was like this, and I've turned it so it's diagonally. And I just kind of line it up with my needle down there so that I can see that the point of the corner is pretty much lined up with that red line on my 1/4 inch foot. And I'm going to sew off diagonally. and cut my fabric. And then I'm going to turn my piece. Got my iron one. Turn that off. That was hot. Okay, so I'm going to turn my piece over. Try to make sure that you can see what I'm doing on the camera here. And where I have that going off diagonally, I'm going to fold my piece up. I want it going in a diagonal from the corner down to the end here. I hope that you're being able to see that well. And then I just kind of finger press it a little bit, and I'm going to fold my piece straight down. I want my edge to be lining up with the edge of my fabric. And I want this to look like a little box now. If I feel here, I can feel my diagonal of my fabric that's underneath, that's going diagonal. And I want it to be flush on this side, and I want it to be flush on this side. I don't want that folded piece to be sticking out over here. I want it to look like a little square box. And I'm going to put it back under my needle. And so with my 1/4 of an inch, I go just a little ways, and then I'm going to reverse, and then go forward. And I just kind of hold your corner down nice. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing all the way across until I get to the next corner. I'm going to put my 1/4 inch ruler foot. Whoops. Ended up hitting my camera. I'll be making you guys dizzy. So I put my ruler foot here, my 1/4 inch. You could use, you know, any type of a ruler to do this. And I'm making my line so I know where to stop. And I'm going to sew down to that line. Oops, I didn't get quite to my line. Whoops. I'm going to go back a stitch. There we go. I'm going to turn it diagonally again. I'm looking for that corner to be lined up with my red line. And I'm going to sew off diagonally and cut my thread. And once again, I'm going to turn my piece. And I'm going to fold this up so I get my diagonal right there. I'm going to finger press that. I want it to stay in the diagonal so that this corner is meeting up with the edge of my quilt, my corner of my quilt. And I want to be keeping this straight over on this side. And I'm going to fold it back down. And I don't want this side to be poking out. I want it to be flush. My folded piece underneath here, I want it to be equal with this side. And I want this side to be flush on this side. Hold that together and get it back under my needle. About 3/4 stitches forward. Then I'm going to go in reverse. And then come back. And I'm going to sew all the way to the next corner. Drive me crazy. I don't usually sew this slow. Mark down on this end. Keeping the end straight. Turn it. Once again, I'm making sure that on the corner that it's lined up with the red on my foot. I'm going to sew off diagonal and cut my thread. My thread on the bottom, didn't want to cut. There we go. Okay, once again we're folding in a diagonal. We want to make sure that that diagonal end is going to meet up with our corner over here. Keeping it straight over on this side. Do a little finger press. Fold it down. Make sure it's flush on this side. Make sure that it's flush on this side. Like a little box. Hold it together, get it back under your needle. I'm going to do about 3/4 stitches there and then reverse it. And then come back. And we're going to sew till we get to that last corner. Straighten my fabric out. Get my little 1/4-inch ruler, make my mark. Sew down to that line. Turn my fabric. Checking my corner is lined up with my red piece, and sew off diagonally. And cut my thread. Okay, this is our last side, so you'll be seeing how we get these pieces together. We're going to fold it diagonally. Once again, this is the last time we need to do this, making sure that our diagonal meets up with our corner over there. Stay straight on the other side. Fold it down. Take a check, make sure everything is flush and lined up. Hold it together and whoops, I didn't have it up there close enough. Into our 2-3 stitches or so. Go backwards and then go forward. Get lint on here from my batting. Okay, so I sew this right up until it's about 8-10 inches apart from each other. I'm going to do a little fix with my stitches, and some of you might need to go back and forth to do that. I have a fix thing on the machine. Just locks my stitches. I'm going to trim those threads on the back. Lost them someplace. It's popped up in the air. Okay. Now this is the part that I really want to make sure that I'm getting in the camera. I'm dropping stuff everywhere today. I'm just using, I don't know, what I call my guide ruler. It has a little thing that goes up and down. You could use a small ruler like this as well. So the piece that I started with, that I left that flap hanging in the air, I'm going to lay it down. Actually, I'm going to cut some of that off because I left quite a lot of it on there. It only needs to be, let me see, about 4 inches from your stitching. And I'm going to fold it in half and cut that excess off. I always save those pieces just in case I want to use them in a scrap quilt someday. I keep saying I'm going to do one of those quilts that uses all your small pieces. Sometimes I just end up donating them. Okay, let me see that there we go. I want to make sure I'm getting this on the camera because this is a little bit of the tricky part. Okay, I think I'm getting that in camera well. So I'm going to bring this piece down and I'm going to kind of lay it next to the other piece. This is where my other piece ends right here. I'm going to lay this down next to it without pulling it. And I'm going to measure 2.5 inches down. And what I'm measuring is, I'm measuring from the very end of this piece of fabric, the one that I started with and just trimmed. I've got my ruler on there. I'm laying this fabric next to it without pulling up my table runner and getting it down to the 2.5 inch mark. Now you can either mark it, I'm going to do a little dash there because it's hard for me to fold it up the way that I usually do. I'm going to do a little tiny mark there, so I know where to fold it. And I'm going to fold this in half right where I made that little dash on the edge. I'm going to fold it up in half, and I'm going to trim off that excess and set that excess to the side. This is probably the hardest part of doing your binding because you don't have as much room to work with. Anytime that I've sewed, maybe too close to one side of the, like too close, and maybe I don't have enough work room. I've got a pretty good amount of work room here, so I'm not feeling unconfident about it. But if I had sewed maybe way up here and I only had a little tiny bit of work room, sometimes I'll take, I'll take my seam ripper and take a few stitches out so I've got enough room to work. Because we are going to, okay, so see how it's folded and it's flush to the side. I'm going to be opening this piece up and I'm going to lay it down so that the right side is up. And when we had started putting these together, this is the piece that went this way because it's right side up. I almost have to fold my fabric up in order to do this so I can get this piece up here where I want it. And like I said, this is probably the most difficult part of doing your binding because we are going to put these two pieces together and I've got to get them close enough to each other that they will lay down the way that I need them to. I don't have extra selvage to worry about and whatnot. I will have just a tiny bit overextending on this side and just a little tiny bit, maybe about 1/8 of an inch or so. And I'm gonna put a little pin over here just to hold this in place for me, so it's not giving me as much trouble. And you're going to take your ruler, and once again, we're going to do that diagonal line going from corner to corner. So I've got my diagonal line. It's going from this corner down to that corner. And I'm going to sew following that line. And because I have my guide foot on, I don't worry about taking that off, because what I'm matching up is I'm matching up my line with my red guide piece that's in my foot. That's going to line me up with my needle. And as long as I'm lined up with that, I don't have to worry about it. Okay, I can take my pin out. Now, once again, you could take your 1/4 inch ruler or whatever ruler you're using for your 1/4 inch and draw another line if you want. I just kind of guesstimate this. Oops, keep hitting that camera. I'm going to be making everybody dizzy trying to watch me. And I'm just going to cut and trim that excess piece off. And I'm going to trim off my dog ears. Make sure this piece is straight so I'm getting it right. Get that out of my way. Now, I just pull my piece down and see how that just pops right into line. So I had it out like here. This is where I was working on it, but because I pressed it before, when I straighten it out, it just pops into place. And what you're looking for here is you don't want it to be bubbling up. I'm going to finger press that seam down. I don't want it to be crisscrossy folded over. I want it to be flat in there. And I'm just going to finger press it just a little bit. And it's flush with my side. If this was waving or bubbling up or looks like it's too much fabric, normally you would check that before you did your cut. But I had done all my measurements and I'm used to doing it. So I knew I was fine. So then I'm gonna go back a few stitches from where I ended off, and I'm gonna start stitching from there. And I will do a fix here. Now your fix might, like I said, might be coming forward, going back a couple stitches. Now I'm going to sew all the way to where I began. And I'm going to go a little bit past where I began sewing. So I go over my previous stitches. And if you need to do the back and forth thing, that's fine. I'm just going to use my fix button and set those stitches and cut my thread. Now we have, this is where we combined our two pieces together, and it's like all one piece. Now, if it will drive you crazy, you can go around and you can snip some extra threads. I usually don't worry about it because I'm going to tuck them in underneath my binding and no one's ever going to see them. If I see that they're poking out as I go, I'll trim them as I go, but usually you'll see, I just tuck them underneath into my binding and no one sees them. So I found that even if I go around my quilt and I cut off all these little fraying pieces, by the time I sew around, I'm going to have more fraying pieces. So I just don't worry about it. I'm just going to tuck them in. So now at this point, I still have it face down. I'm working on the back, and I'm going to finger press, and I'm going to turn my corners over as I go. And I'm just going to finger press my piece down nice and flat, going all around, just going to pop my corners over. And I'm just going to finger press it. I'm going to do that all the way on all my sides on the back. And this is just going to help you when you turn this over to have your binding more straight. So I'm just going to finger press it all the way over, turning my corners over as I go. I'll be showing you how we're going to sew this to the top afterward. I'm just finger pressing. Got one more side to finger press. Turn that corner down like so. And do my finger pressing as I go. And I'm just rubbing my hand across it just to somewhat set that in place. It's not perfect. You could press it if you wanted all the way. Some people like to press it. I just finger press. Okay, so now I'm going to turn this over to the right side. Now I know not everybody has what they call the left edge top stitch foot. If you don't have one and your machine can use one, I recommend that if you're going to be doing quilts and be doing binding, that you get one. The reason being is because this side has a little like, how would you say it? Like a indention. So that as it goes across my fold, it stays up against this as I'm sewing. It takes a little practice. When I first started using it, I kind of zigzagged a little bit because I was nervous. I was holding my breath the whole time. Never a good idea. You got to breathe while you're doing stuff, or you tense up and get nervous. This side is flush with this side a little bit more. Not quite exactly, perfectly, but there's an indentation here. And I'm hoping that you're seeing that in the camera. And so my fabric's going to stay up against this fold. And it really helps me a lot when I'm doing top stitching. If you can't get a foot like this, don't have a foot like this, you can fold your piece over to the front. And you could easily, trying to find my foot down. Whoops, that was foot up. You could get it so that your fabric, you guide it by having it go up against your straight edge foot. So this edge of your fabric, you would use this side of your foot on the inside as your guide and stitch. And that, you'll be a little further in, but that's fine. It'll still give you a fairly decent, good straight line, as long as you're sewing nice and careful, watching what you're doing. You could get your binding done this way. And I know that there are some people that just won't be able to use the foot that I'm showing you, and will need to use a straight edge foot. Or you could do it the way that I was showing you before, with a stitch in the ditch, where you sew it to the front first and then fold it over to the back, and then when you do your last stitching, you would stitch in the ditch. And this would actually be folded to the back side, so your fold would be on the other side. Now for me, using the foot that I'm using, I've got to have my fabric more like this. Maybe I had it right the first time. Let me think. Doing it on camera. I got to rethink everything that I'm doing and think about what I'm doing. Yeah, okay. So it's kind of the same thing, except I like the fact that that has that indentation, and this fold of my fabric is going to go up against that indentation. And I'm watching that my fabric stays lined up with this little red line here. I'm going to do needle down and checking. I can even do my foot completely down so I can check that my fold is lined up with that line on my foot. If you're doing it with your straight edge, you're going to be making sure that this fold is up against the inside of the foot on this side. I hope that helps. Just getting this folded down a little ways. Now if you want, you could fold it over and you could clip it as you go. And you could clip, like, you know, even a whole side down to the down to your corner. I usually don't start too close to a corner. I'm going to take my foot back up out of my way. I usually start down a little ways. I don't like to start too close to a corner. I like to be able to come around a corner and have a little ways to sew. So I usually start down a little ways. I'll do my down again. Check that to make sure that it's lined up. I just do a guesstimate. I've been doing this for quite a while, so I don't worry about the clipping. I can see that I'm staying, you know, that my piece is straight. I just press it down a little bit. And I'm just going to be watching this edge of my fabric is staying lined up with that line. I am going to turn my machine back down a little bit. I get a little heavy on the foot. And for this I have to watch just a little bit more. And as I go, as I'm bringing my fold over, if I have frayed pieces of my fabric, I just tuck them underneath like so that they're out of my way, and I fold my piece over. Sorry if I'm hitting my camera and making you dizzy. But I wanted to have it down here close enough so you'd be able to see a lot of what I'm doing. And I'm going to sew this all the way down until I get down to my corner. So quiet, but I'm just staying kind of concentrated on my piece as I go. I'm sewing it until I'm almost to my corner. I'm going to be a couple inches away from my corner. And then I'm going to take my finger and I just kind of push the side out, which kind of causes this side to start laying down, which is hard to see. I'm going to fold this bottom piece up and press it to the side. I just kind of press down the corners. Some people will snip the corners diagonally. I don't like to do it because every once in a while I've had a problem where that comes apart. So I don't like to do it. I just kind of press it down because it is a little bulky in there. And I press that piece down. I know my fingers are getting like right in the way when I'm trying to show you this, and it's frustrating. So I just kind of press that corner down. I've got this nice and flat. This is popped up over here. I'm going to take my pin and I sink it into that corner. So it's flush with the edge of my fabric on that farthest side. And I lay my pin there and I'm going to fold this side over. And I'm not really pinning it or anything, but I just laid it there and folded my fabric over this direction so that I could get my nice corner. Now I'm going to sew this down until my needle is laying right where it's almost like a seam, where this part is overlapping onto this part. I want my needle to be laying right on the very edge of this fabric up here, down here in this crease. And then I'm going to pivot my fabric. Okay, so I've got my needle, so it's sitting right in the edge of that fabric. And I'm going to turn this, and then I'm going to fold this over so it's nice and straight. Line it up again, and I'm going to sew until I get to my next corner. When I first learned how to do binding, I used to take that binding tutorial and I would play it and I would pause it at the corner part and then watch it just before I did my corner. But sometimes that helps. Everybody's different in how they learn, so whatever works for you to learn how to do it, that's what's best. Okay, I'm going to get about 2 inches before my corner. I'm going to push that fabric so it pops up a little bit. And as I'm pushing it back, I wish there was a way that I could get my camera so you can see this just a little bit better. I'm worried that my fingers are in the way. Tucking threads in here at the same time. So I'm kind of popping it back, and I'm going to fold this piece up. And I want to make sure that my piece is laying nice and flat on this side. I got a little thread that's going to irritate me right there. Snip that out of my way. Okay, so once again I'm going to press that corner down get it so it's not so bulky. I'm going to take my pin and I'm going to lay it down right in that crevice so it's lined up with my other fabric edge that's on the inside of my top. And while it's laying in there, I'm going to fold my fabric over, take my needle out of the way. And so let me see if I can show you this. It's not laying on there quite so that it's got your mitered corner. This side is coming down here too much, and I won't get my nice mitered corner. So I'm going to pop that back up out of my way. And I'm going to get this laying back down because I don't like that. And we got another thread that wants to poke out and be irritating. And once again, I'm going to lay my needle in there. And I'm going to fold this over. And it's not wanting to cooperate quite well. So I gotta mess with it just a little bit. Get my needle back down in there and fold it over. Sometimes you have to mess with these corners just a little bit so that you can get that mitered corner that you want. Sometimes they play well and sometimes they don't. But there, now I got my mitered corner. And I know that it's hard to see because my finger's like right in the way. But I'm looking for this and this to give me a nice corner when it's laid down. I don't want this piece to be laying over this piece so it's like way down here, because then I won't have my nice mitered corner. Kind of pulled my fabric over a little bit, so I'm going to lift my foot up so I can get it laying back down right and laying back up. Now I won't say that every one of my corners is exactly perfectly mitered. It might not be today because I'm in the camera doing this. And usually I'm not doing it on camera. So it's kind of got my full focus when I'm not on camera, but it'll be close enough. The other end of my table runner here is getting like typically when I do binding like on a long table runner like this, it might take me half an hour, 45 minutes. That's with cutting, pressing, sewing, everything. And when I do a large quilt, about an hour and a half, 2 hours. The more bindings you do, the easier it gets. some threads down here so when I get down to my corner, they may not be irritating me like they were before. Okay, once again, I'm going to sew until I'm about approximately 2 inches from my corner. I'm going to pull it out on this side so I can lay this side down nice and flat. You don't want to, when you're folding it over, you want to make sure that you're not like rolling up your quilt. You want it to stay nice and flat in there. I'm going to push that over to the side some. Pushing down my corner to flatten it out some. And I'm going to put my pin in there. Fold this over to get my mitered corner. Oh, that one decided to be nice. I'm going to sew until I get to the edge of that fabric. And then turn my fabric. You can tell with this foot if you've sewed down onto your other piece of fabric far enough, because when you fold this over, if that's not meeting up with your line, then you know that either you went too far or you didn't go far enough. Okay, we're going to sew down to our last corner. I remember the first time that I used this foot, it was waving, and sometimes I had sewed on this side and I wasn't even up on my fabric, and I took it into the shop and I showed it to the woman that I eventually ended up working for, and she just kind of giggled and she's like, "Oh, sit down." So she had me do it in front of her, and she gave me a few tips, and I kept watching that video and practicing, and now I do a pretty straight line most of the time. I won't say all the time, but most of the time. And this foot really helps. Before, I think when I was first learning, I was trying to use a straight edge foot, and it was kind of messing me up. Then I tried this other foot, I can't remember the name of it, that one place was using, but when I would get to a corner, it would always get me miscombobulated. And so she introduced me to this foot, and it's been so much better ever since. Okay, we'll get this side done. Press that corner down, get our pin in there. Fold that side over. It's not quite mitered the way that I want it. Let me see. There we go. And you're always folding this side down first. I remember back, I used to get confused, and I used to fold this side down first and then fold this over, and you end up kind of what they call a camel toe on your end. So you want to fold this side down first, then you fold the side that you had been sewing in over it, and you get your mitered corner by putting that pin in there and folding it over. There we go. And we're almost to the end here. And our binding will be all done. And we'll have a pretty table cover, or table runner rather. threads are nicely tucked in. And when I get to the end, this is where I've overlapped a little bit on where my stitches had started. And I'm going to do a fixed stitch here. If you need to do the back and forth thing, that's totally fine. Dropping everything. Whoops, sorry about that. Hit the camera, be making you dizzy. I've been dropping everything today. And then you just want to trim the last of your threads. And I always go around the back, see if any stragglers popped out through the bottom. Either you can pull them out or you might need to snip them. Sometimes that will happen. But yeah, so now we have our, let me move the camera over here just a little bit so that hopefully you can see. Now we have our binding all on. We have our mitered corners. It's looking pretty nifty. I'm going to take a picture of it and post the picture of it. I want to thank you for spending time with me on this tutorial. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I hope that you've learned a few things, and I hope that you'll give it a try, because even though these star blocks and with the heart in it looks a little difficult, with the size that it is, it's really not as difficult as it looks. It's really pretty easy. A lot of you have been trying the half square triangles with the blocks for the sampler quilt. It's really not any harder than that. All of this is either squares, only 2 rectangles that go in the heart. These are half square triangles, these are half square triangles, and then your whole blocks. It's really very easy, but looks absolutely spectacular when you get it all together. And especially with this table runner, because we've gone from having just a heart in the center of our block and a star, but you end up with this diamond shape in between them. That's just spectacular to me. Well, I hope that you have a great rest of your day. This has been a tutorial with Seaside Quilting Tutorials. My name is Terry, and we'll see you next time.